Right, hello everyone. Good morning, my name is Rafe Spies and I'm here to be your host on today's call. The topic of the call is how are adopted and fostered children coping with lockdown? And the call is presented today by the Trauma Action Group, or TAG, in partnership with Headsight Services. On today's agenda, we'll start things off with Tony France, who's the director of TAG, who will be briefly exploring the impacts of trauma on adopted and fostered children, particularly in the context of the current pandemic. After we've heard from Tony, I should say, we'll also have a bit of a panel discussion. You can see many of those panelists here on the screen now. They include Hayley Foley, Director of Therapeutic Services at Headsight, Laura Garnett, who is a counselling psychologist at Five Rivers Childcare, Dr. Kerry Davies is an adoptive parent, John Boodle, who is an adoptive parent, Vicky Harris is a foster carer with Five Rivers Childcare again, and Michelle Welburn, who is a foster carer with Five Rivers Childcare. Thank you all for joining us. You'll have a chance to ask questions during the course of the call. There's a Q&A button at the bottom. You can wait until the discussion with the panel at the end, or you can start asking questions now. It's entirely up to you. So let's crack on. So I'll hand over to Tony now. Fortunately, if you do have any technical issues, we'll try and help you, but it's probably a bit difficult on today's call, but we'll see how we go. So now I'll hand over to Tony to kick things off. Tony, over to you.
Good morning. Thank you. This really came about when we created the Trauma Action Group as a new organisation earlier this year, really beginning to think about how trauma-informed approaches would improve everybody's life. I guess it's one of those things where nobody loses if we are trauma-informed in terms of how we approach everything from our employment right the way through to our interactions with individuals. Then everybody benefits. And those who have experienced trauma really benefit more. Then came the pandemic, then came the lockdown. And I was pondering really what might be going on for some of the children and young people and families that we're working with. We work with an enormous amount of children and young people and families, almost all who have experienced some level of early life trauma that is now presenting in their everyday life. And parents and carers and professionals are working hard to help them process that and begin to access life. What came to me is that the three conditions that really significantly increase the chances of psychological trauma or complex trauma are that whatever happened, the event was unexpected, and that the person or the child was unprepared for what was going to happen, and that there was nothing they could do to stop it, and they were overwhelmed. When thinking about this, I really started to think about the COVID situation and lockdown in particular. So actually, to a degree, it was largely unexpected, and certainly to children, it was unexpected. All of a sudden, I can't go to school. Mum, dad are at home again, and that was unexpected. I can't see my friends. I was unprepared for the fact that actually my life has changed profoundly, and that there was nothing that we could do about it, that actually this virus, this pandemic existed, and there was nothing we could do to change that. What I was then interested in is that those families that we work with who had really been having some tough times, some really difficult times, actually weren't the ones that were experiencing the difficulties. And many of the children and young people that had experienced trauma were actually doing really well in lockdown. And I was really curious about that, hence thinking about putting together the webinar to say, well, actually, what has this meant for children? Being in a completely unexpected situation where we had to become prepared together and find ways not to be overwhelmed by what's going on. And I suppose that the last thing for me around that was that the one mitigating factor, the one thing that makes a difference to whether or not we're likely to develop some kind of psychological reaction or trauma reaction is the availability of a safe adult at the time of distress, and that somebody's there with us to reach out to provide support at that time. And hence the other panel members here really who are those people who are there at times of distress to help children not hopefully become re-traumatized and have to relive their early trauma, but actually to model and find a way through working out how we get through this together. Rafe.
Tony, thank you very much. Very interesting, lots of food for thought there. We also asked everybody before they joined this call, you may remember when you registered, we asked a very brief few questions about how you felt about how things are going at the moment. And we thought we'd start off by just showing some of those questions and how you told us things are going. So lockdown life, here's what you told us. Very briefly, in the audience today, we've got about 100 people on the call. So the numbers here are slightly higher because some people obviously fill 2 roles. 47 people work in the children's workforce professional. Say that again 10 times fast. 22 people are either adopted parents, special guardians, or foster carers. 38 were just straight down the line parents, I suppose you'd say, and others or not applicable was 12. We asked you in the questionnaire, how would you rate your experience of lockdown generally? I think this is actually quite sort of, in some ways, not too surprising, but in other ways, it's good to see that there aren't too many people saying the experience has been absolutely excellent or absolutely awful, although there are quite a few there. It seems as though for the majority of people, the experience has been somewhere in the middle, and it's kind of good to see that for a lot of people, it's been fairly average, which is, I think, is a relief. The other question we asked you is, how has your relationship with your children changed during lockdown? This was a very interesting one as well, because in terms of worsening, it was a very small number. I've got the number in front of me, which is only 3 people said that. The vast majority said things have been about the same or improved or greatly improved, which is great to hear. So we've heard a lot of stories in the media about how things may have been terrible for families, some people stuck in difficult home situations and so forth. But of course, we've heard lots of stories in the media about how fantastic things have been and the way people have adapted to the situation. And I think in some ways this shows a little bit of the broad sort of spectrum of what's there. We also asked you for your views on, in your own words, about some of the things that you experienced. Some of my favorites here are varied, mostly good with moments of panic, a bit of a roller coaster probably, a roller coaster of different emotions. I'm just going to get my Zoom window out of the way so I can see what the other one says. Isn't that typical? You can never predict what will happen on the day. There we go. Hard work with no break, but mostly good with little pockets of manageable meltdowns. I love that, sort of manageable meltdowns. We also had people say it's been a corona coaster. I like that one as well. We've had okay at first, starting to become frustrating now that the novelty has worn off. I felt very claustrophobic and overwhelmed. Calmer, less pressure, and more time as a family. Concerned about the children I work with therapeutically. So obviously on this call, we've got some people with kids of their own and some people working with children. Guilty because I'm more relaxed, others are frantic. Oops, sorry. The joy of live television. Everyone is managing to chill out without school pressures. That's a thing that I think we'll hear quite a bit of today on the call. What are your concerns about the future? And briefly, some people have told us, they've said concerned about how this, concerned about how this has affected him long-term and him struggling to go back to school and settling in as he struggled with confidence. How do we reach the invisible children we know are vulnerable? And lastly, I'm concerned how I and my children and my child will cope with returning to a world full of people. So there's lots of different things there, and it's interesting to hear the kind of range of reactions and emotions that people have had. But now it's time for us to sort of turn to our panelists and have a bit of a discussion. And I was wondering if it wouldn't be a problem if I started with you, Laura, just to get a bit of a view of some of the people that are in your care. I understand you have quite a number of families out there. Do you have any sort of insights that you'd like to share about what you've seen and how that relates to what we've just seen?
Yeah, so we've seen what we're sort of seeing within our service area is pretty similar to what you've described there. The majority of our children and young people are coping okay, are doing what we'd expect. Placements are quite stable. We are seeing some challenges. Some of those tend to come from issues around where there was already issues in the placement, and then where the cracks sort of have already been shown and then have widened under the pressure of lockdown and under coronavirus. But the majority of our children have actually settled well into it, which is nice to see. I think a big part of that is definitely around the needs of looked after children and around adopted children as well. We know developmentally they have a lot of gaps, and lockdown is basically providing a really tight containment space for those gaps to be filled in a lot of ways. So a really predictable day. A lot of us would consider it sort of like Groundhog Day, but we know that looked after children really benefit from that. And so we've got the predictability of the day. We've also got the high levels of one-to-one time, the high levels of nurture within the families. So a lot of the therapeutic parenting basics, the high level of boundaries, high level of routine, high level of nurture, are really shining through within the lockdown circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And I might turn now to Vicky. I understand you have a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 15-year-old. Is that right? Have I got the numbers right? Amazing.
Yeah.
How has the experience been for you? Has it taken you by surprise? Have you seen any sort of, I guess, behaviours evidencing themselves?
I think, like everybody, I think it's the same sort of things you see. What I've seen is the ones that I thought would not be a problem and were very stable have been triggered very easily because they thought everything was going to be the same as before. And it appears the ones that have suffered in the past with events changing around them where they've had no control, they've almost just rolled with it because they're used to that change. So with 3 different ages, and all girls as well, doesn't help. They do trigger each other, which is quite entertaining on occasion, but also very challenging. So it's a mixed bag, and I think unfortunately I've got the spectrum all in one house. But yeah, it's they all help each other as well, which is reassuring.
Great. John, similar sort of, if you could just tell us briefly about the kids that you take care of. It sounds like you've had a very busy household over the last...
Yeah, so we've got 3 boys. We've adopted 3 boys, a 3-year-old, a 9-year-old and a 13-year-old. The 2 younger children have basically been able to adapt quite well. And it's the biggest change we've seen in JB, who's 13. And he's really settled into it. He had early life trauma and all the classic attachment behaviours, and struggled at school academically and at home as well, big meltdowns, etc., the normal kind of things. But since lockdown has really, really flourished. The meltdowns have almost stopped. He's calmer. He knows what's going on, all the things that people have talked about. It's just an amazing change that we've seen in him.
Gosh, that sounds very positive. It's unfortunate that a strange circumstance like this has sort of led to that.
Well, we talked, because we've worked with Headsight for a while, and I used to joke about the fact that if I could take him out of school in some sort of circumstance and put him in some sort of bubble until he was about 16, 17, we might make it all through it to unscathed. But this has been an ability to actually look at this.
Okay. And Michelle, has there been a similar sort of experience for you? Just tell us a little bit about, obviously, about the kids that you're taking care of, and what's the experience been like?
I foster siblings, a little boy who's 5 and a little girl who's nearly 7. The little boy is just adjusted. You wouldn't even tell there was a pandemic. He's just carried on with his normal life. Little girl struggles at school. She has an ECHD plan and she has flourished again. Taking school out of it has made such a difference. I am fostering a different little girl. It is amazing, the change in her. Yes, so really the same. We're embracing lockdown. It's been a big thing for us, a positive thing. It's been really good. And I mean, we do have our bad days. I'm not saying we're sailing through it, but the majority of our days are positive, which I wouldn't have been able to say that before. It was every day was just a nightmare, but not anymore. I'm dreading really going back to school. If I could stay in our little bubble, then I would be staying in our bubble.
We'll definitely be coming on to the what happens next question. Kerry, what about you? Just tell us briefly about the kids that you take care of, and what's your experience been like overall?
Yeah, so I adopted 1 son. He's 6. He also has autism. But I've noticed very little change in it at all. So the first week, it was difficult, I think more so for me than for him. It's about trying to find that new routine. How do we do schoolwork? When do we do schoolwork? But once we sort of got into the routine, after that, it was very simple, and I actually enjoyed doing home learning. And he gets to do so much more learning at home than he does at school. Yeah, so there's not really much difference. I'd say the difference in him is in school, he's very unsettled and he's very on edge. So we've removed that element from his life. So in general, I'd say he's a lot calmer.
I think if I was that age and the parents had all said school is the problem, I would have agreed. It's the bane of my existence. So, Hayley, just quickly turning to you, you've obviously had the experience of having children of your own, but also the work with Headsight and the families that you speak to and deal with. What have you seen across the board, and has it surprised you, or has it been what you would have expected?
No, I've definitely been surprised. I think when this began, I imagined that there would be an awful lot of kind of crisis work needing to happen. I imagined that an awful lot of families that were already struggling their struggles would be significantly more. But actually that hasn't been the case. And what I have experienced in my support of families is kind of very reflective of what the others have talked about. Families seem to have just settled into it. Anxiety seems to have really reduced in many, many children. And for lots of young people that I'm supporting, their experience seems to be really positive. It's not the case for all. There are some families that are really struggling. There are some families that we are concerned about in terms of their lockdown experience, but on the whole, very, very surprised at what a positive experience it's been for families and how much they've been able to embrace the opportunity, definitely.
Okay. Tony, anything else you'd like to add while we're on that topic?
I think I was just thinking about those conditions again from the trauma perspective, and it seems to be that where the relationship environment becomes predictable, it just calms children, that they're able, and school is so unpredictable in terms of relationships, so socially complex, and when you remove that unpredictability and complexity, I'm amazed how quickly children can begin to process information and really begin to thrive in some of those environments, I guess. When Laura mentioned predictability, the safety in Groundhog Day for children is huge, that they are able to access. They know what's going to happen today. They know who they're going to see. They know what they're going to be doing. And that just makes a huge, huge difference to them.
Yeah, Vicky, is there anything else you'd add to that as well? I mean, it seems as though I would imagine that the first week or two would have been the most difficult part, just getting into the routine. And once you're into the routine, I suspect things got a bit easier, didn't they?
Yeah, it was really strange for mine, because I sat them down and suggested that it's their time to make use of study, because obviously being away, they're all school age where they're leading towards their exams, which is very important. The more they invest now, the better. And we had a conversation. They agreed to get up and be sat at a table at 9 in the morning, work through till 3 with a break when they chose. And to be fair, they've been exceptionally diligent. So bizarrely, my first week was very, very calm. As time has passed and they've chipped at the edges, and less time and longer breaks and more chat, that focus is being lost. And that's where it started to come out, because when they're talking amongst themselves and with me there, you start hearing about what they're worried about, where their anxieties are. And they won't say it direct to me, but they share it between the four of us. So it's actually probably 3 weeks in where it really started becoming apparent. But because they were talking about it quite openly and they didn't feel they were being judged, it was quite easy to manage most of the time. The odd, as Tony would put it, a dip day, where they come to the table and they just weren't in the right frame of mind and they would distract the others without thought. And you run with that as it happens. But yeah, I was expecting it at the beginning to be much tougher than it was. But bless them, they ramped it up on me slowly and secretively.
Excellent. John, I was going to just turn to you then. If I'm correct, you have a 3-year-old.
Yes.
There. How has a child that young and that small, I suppose, coped with being given a routine and I don't want to say trapped in a house, but it's not far off.
Well, it's not far. I mean, he's got additional needs, which means he's basically presenting as a 2-year-old. So he's about to turn 4 on Friday, and he's in a sort of a wrecking mode at the moment. So if I don't turn the toaster off at the plug, off goes the toaster. I was wondering where the smell was coming from this morning. Yeah, everything gets turned on, everything gets turned over. If you look away, it's, yeah, manic. But so trying to be able to manage the old boy's education as well as looking after a 3-year-old has been tricky. I think full on is the best way to describe it. So we would like to see that at some point he needs that structure. You've got to sit down, you've got to do things with him all day long. I hold my hand up that Peppa Pig has saved our lives because he loves Peppa Pig at the moment. Yeah, it's been tricky, but we do get to go out. I only do half a day of lessons. We stop at lunchtime and then we go off in the afternoons because the boys need to get out, and it's just better for the whole household for us to get out.
And then goodness for the weather. That's all I can say.
Thank goodness for the weather. Yeah.
All right, so I thought we might now, that gives us a really good view of how things have been for people on the call. And remember, everyone who's listening in, you can ask a question at any point if you want to just click the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. But before we get to that, I thought I'd run a little quick poll before we head into the wonderful world of what happens next. It's totally optional if you want to answer these questions. It's up to you, but I'll put them on the screen now. And our panelists, you're welcome to complete the questions as well. So it's 2 questions. After the recent announcements, how concerned are you about the next few months? And what are your biggest concerns about the next few months? You can select multiple of those, but try to pick 2 or 3 that are probably the biggest concerns for you. And then I'll share the results on the screen. So hopefully you've all got that on your screens now, and vote at your leisure. It's bad news for Boris. Okay, I'll just give it another 10 seconds or so. There we go. Give it a few more moments. God, what did we do before Zoom? Suppose we saw people.
We see people, yeah.
We met and shook hands and hugged. Great. Okay, so that looks like most people have voted it in there now. So I'll end the poll, and I think I can share the results. It's always good when technology works the way you think it will. So it looks as though there's a fairly clear sweep towards being more concerned and much more concerned, or about the same, in terms of the transition back to normal life, whatever that is, or the new normal, as everybody seems to be saying these days. It's going to be an interesting trick. And I think one thing that we might have seen from Boris's announcement is actually it's more simple in some ways to say stay home, save lives, than it is to say, well, you can kind of do this and do a little bit of that and some of those. And I think perhaps everyone in the government's been taken a bit by surprise by that as well. It certainly looks like the transition back to the school is the biggest worry. Long-term effect on people's mental health is obviously a big concern. Actually catching the virus as well is obviously an enormous worry for lots of people, and being overwhelmed with new problems. So there's a fair bit of uncertainty there, and I can completely understand with people's concerns. I wonder if we might sort of turn to some of our panelists to talk about that. And Hayley, if you don't mind, if I can sort of start with you. You've spoken, we've spoken in the past, obviously, about how you help children understand the emotions and help to sort of model the emotions that they might feel. Could you just talk to us a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think something that's been really apparent during this time is that parents at home with children obviously have their own emotional response to what's going on. And something that I talk a lot with families about is that children gain an awful amount of confidence and safety according to how their parents are feeling. So if I'm okay, then essentially my children are more likely to be okay. So I think that's something that's been really apparent. And also an opportunity for parents to have a really good chunk of time in terms of providing that consistent therapeutic approach to what's going on in the nurture and so on. And I think moving forward, the same elements apply. I think there's an awful lot of anxiety and worry about what's going to happen in the coming weeks and months. But I think there's, a huge amount of emphasis on us being able to help our children prepare and to re-enter school, re-enter the community in terms of our own confidence levels around that. So I think it's really important that we are talking to children, that we are helping them to make sense of and to understand, their experience, but also that we're not catastrophizing things and we're helping them to gain confidence from how we're feeling. And I think for an awful lot of parents, it's going to be a day-by-day approach in terms of, seeing what happens as their children re-enter the school system and so on. And it'll be interesting to observe what happens in terms of being able to compare kind of life as it's been during lockdown to, what life becomes again when we all enter our new whatever it turns out to be.
New normal, I think that's the buzzword we're all supposed to use. It's getting a bit overused. There's been a lot of talk about sort of being in a nice bubble. And Laura, I wonder if you have any thoughts about what you think will happen next. It would be lovely if bubbles have a habit of bursting. It would be nice if they sort of gently broke open and everybody got back to life. Do you have any thoughts or any suggestions about what the next phase might be like for people, and for children particularly?
Well, you would hope that it would be gradual. That would be a big hope, and that it's not just going to go from bubble to burst bubble, as you say. I think Hayley said exactly right there. It's about not catastrophising, about making sure we support as adults, manage our own anxiety in healthy ways, and being able to talk to each other, being able to seek support from the right places, but also being able to model healthy anxiety. So being able to talk about our worries, model that to children to help them be able to model that back and do the same, really, to talk about what they're worried about and think about that in advance of it happening, to try and sort of minimise the effect of that a little bit when it does happen. So hopefully it will be a gradual transition and it won't be too much of a shock to the system for them.
I think it's going to have to be. And Kerry, you're obviously, it sounds like you're going to have a very complicated return to school in your household. Can you tell us a bit about that and what you're expecting and what you hope will happen?
Yeah, so my son's got an education healthcare plan, so I've been quite lucky in that he is still allowed to go to school. I haven't been putting him in school, that's only been recent. He's been doing half a day a week, but now that's going to have to increase. I don't really know how that's going to work, how you can socially distance a 6-year-old from other 6-year-olds. I wish them luck on that one. But also, we're going through the process of trying to get him into a special school. So I've got the added uncertainty of, well, which school is he going to go to now? And so that's really worrying. My biggest worry, though, is if we have to roll back lockdown. How do I explain to him that, well, you could go to school, but now you can't go to school again? I don't think that would go down well. I think that would be a point where he might start to take off a bit. I'm hoping I'm wrong, but that is my biggest worry around schooling and transitioning back into it if we have to go back.
So uncertainty is obviously a big worry for all of us, and I think there just isn't certainty. We don't have it. It would be lovely if we did. Tony, do you have anything you would add there? I mean, because obviously that's one of the sort of conditions of trauma is uncertainty. And given your role in schools, do you think it's a question we've been asked on the Q&A, what do you think schools should be doing to help children return?
I think they need to recognise, I guess, it is one of the core conditions or related to it, but one of the behaviours that we see in children who have experienced early trauma, it's often referred to as controlled behaviours, or they're very controlling. And because so much of their environment over time or in early life was beyond their control, they will seek to make their environments as predictable as possible. I think one of my worries is that when they will have an image of what school will be like based on their previous experience, and it won't be like that. I think for schools to communicate to children in terms of how things are going to be different and how they're going to do things, and good luck keeping 2 meters distant in the playground at break, you know, I mean, it just how these things are going to happen is going to need quite a lot of communication to children. When we were talking, Kerry had mentioned that, which I think is fabulous, is I think we should have a strategy for bringing children, adopted children, looked after children, children with the HCPs who are already vulnerable and have experienced some level of early trauma, have a strategy that actually meets their needs coming back into school. I think, and again, just what we'll also get is, well, we can't, you know, we've got to do this for everyone. But if we have a trauma-informed approach for everyone, everybody benefits. We don't have to do this just for the individuals. We can do this so as everybody benefits. And so what we need to do is manage uncertainty in terms of create what certainty we can, be clear about what areas we've got control, children have got control over, and what areas they haven't. And also that adults continue to make decisions in their life to keep them safe, because that's what this is about. This is about creating safety. They've experienced safety in this bubble, and we've got to find a way to extend that safety into different environments and communicate that in ways that they will recognize.
Right. And I suppose I'd turn to Michelle. Does that resonate with your experience? Do you think that, you know, what are your concerns about the move back to the new normal?
Well, my little one is in reception, so he will go back first. So I haven't really got a lot of worries about him, because I think he needs to be back now. He needs to be, because he's 5 and they're a bit more social, aren't they? I think he's sick of just seeing me and his sister now. Whereas the little girl, she doesn't trust adults at all. The second I take her into school, she goes into fight or flight and she just runs about for the majority of the day. So she's got a one-to-one now who she's just sort of getting a connection with. So I'm a bit worried that one-to-one won't be there. And if she's not there, then who's going to be looking after her? Because otherwise it's a struggle for us and a worry, and for other children really in their class, because I don't know how they're going to manage that. I don't know what teachers are going to be there, what's the ratio. I just, that worries me, and I think it worries her. I try and talk a bit about it every single day to them, to let them know what's going on, where we're at, what's going to happen. But I mean, you don't really know, do you, until you're at, I don't know how she's going to behave. I don't know how she behaves with me sometimes. We can go in the park and she'll be okay, and the next day she won't be. So, and I think we've got a level of trust, whereas at school she doesn't trust anybody. She doesn't trust adults. So I am worried about that.
And do you think, I might put this question back again to you, Tony. I can imagine the government approaching this whole issue from a very practical point of view. You know, this happens, but do you think they're also thinking about mental health, or do you think it's the kind of thing that the broader government strategy probably is just missing?
I think they've got a vague idea, but they're not going to have a strategy that meets those. You know, the idea of you get your one Boris Walk a day for your mental health. But, you know, it's going to have to be individual schools that really recognise the trauma needs and the mental health needs of children returning to school, of staff returning to school, and just thinking about, really interestingly, again, expectations, what's expected. Many of the children, just like Michelle's, have really struggled in school, and they've presented with behaviours that are, and Kerry's, I know, just present in ways that are really difficult to manage in those environments. And teachers and education staff will be coming back with the expectation of those behaviours. Whereas actually what might have happened, so the running around madly in fight-flight, Michelle, is not something that you've seen over lockdown. That actually, you've had a completely different expectation and different experience of relationship, just like you, Kerry, and you, John. my worry is that if the expectation of the school is that these children are going to return with the same behaviours, we might set them up to fail on that basis.
And does that sort of echo with what you were saying, Michelle? I mean, it's not a straightforward process, is it?
No, and I can hear when school ring every week, and I can hear the anxiety in their voices as well about my little girl, about how, because when it first happened, she could have gone back to school, but there was more or less saying, I don't know how we're going to deal with it, I don't know how we're going to do this, I don't know how we're going to do that. And I said, well, that's fine, because if I can, I will keep her home with me, which we did. But I can hear their anxiety as well, which makes me feel a bit anxious. But for her, I think if they're going to be anxious and she's going to go back, you know what our kids are like. They just pick up on anything, don't they? And she reacts in that way. So it does worry.
Yeah, Tony, was there something else you're going to add, or?
I was just thinking about the expectation and preparation, but also the idea that many of the children's developmental needs, and I guess what's important about children like who we're talking about, is that this has provided an opportunity not just for a safe bubble to come back into, but actually for them to miss some of their missed developmental needs have now been met through this time. Where certainly, John, talking with you, with, you know, your elder lad, just being able to sit on the carpet and play Lego and play with cars and do those things that a 13-year-old doesn't have the chance to do, but he needs to go back and do those things. And that hopefully we really see the benefit of that when they come out and they go forward. But there will be a lot of anxiety about that.
John, I was wondering if there's anything you wanted to add to that as well, but we've had a question come through, which is how's the children's behaviour sort of changed during lockdown? What was it like before? And I suppose that might then say, well, what do you think it might be like later? And other than needing to do some decorating work to repair broken things, what do you sort of, you know, what's the transition you've seen and what do you think might happen next?
I think what we saw was, as I said, classic sort of attachment style behaviour for fight and flight, lots of anxiety around going to school, not knowing what's going to happen from day to day, because the peer pressure was this major central part of his life. That's been taken away. Obviously, we've now calmed down. Today, he looked at somebody, sent him a message and say, oh, we can meet somebody outside. Can I go and see my friend outside? My anxiety certainly started going up again. I'm thinking, it's going to start all over again, isn't it? So it's that unpredictability, really, that we don't know how he's going to be able to manage when out in society again. Will he adhere to the rules of social distancing and that lot? He just won't have the capacity to be able to understand that. But school have been really, really good. They've been in constant contact. And he's now starting to do 2 mornings a week. He's got the HCP. So he's going in tomorrow and Friday morning. Start to sort of be able to familiarise himself again with school. Yes, it'll be different, but they're on board with everything. They're talking to us all the time. His TAs are fantastic. So I think we've got a really, really good helping hand to get him back into school.
Yeah. Just dropping sideways a little bit, because we've had a few questions come in. We had a question directed specifically for you, Vicky. What were the young people's worries? So it sounds as though you were mentioning some of the concerns that they had. What can you just tell us a bit more about those?
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, the initial thing was they all thought this was all a bit of fun and it was a change that, you know, great, we don't have to go to school and we can do whatever we want. The realization that it was actually, you know, this is time you can use well or time you can use poorly. They then started thinking about what that meant for them in what work they were doing. They had the concerns about, you know, interacting with other people. I have a husky you've probably seen behind me. They walk him every day, and they go together. And one of the big things we had a long conversation about was, what does, you know, social distancing really mean? And if somebody approaches you, how do you handle it? And basically making sure they were safe within that. And it's really, each of them has personalized it. And I found it quite fascinating because we've had conversations where each of them has talked in turn, but not listened to the others, and they all talk about the same subject, as in, when I go back to school, this will be like this for me. And then the next one will say, but that's like this for me. And then the third will say, that's like this for me. But they're not actually listening to each other, because what they're doing is vocalizing their worry. And two of them don't want to go back. They're absolutely adamant. They don't like their school. They don't want to go back. But they do like their school. But it's the unknown that's coming out, the fear of the unknown. How do they manage it? When we talk about what does that really mean, what are they actually scared of, they don't know. And getting them to face up to the fact they don't know, and they're thinking there are possible issues there that aren't, and getting them to rationalize it and think their way through, has calmed them down a lot. The third one, all she wants to do is go back to school, but she hasn't been here long, and school is more of a safe place for her than here. So it's very different, the perspectives they have. So her worries are, what if I go back and it's not what it was? What if I go back and they don't like me anymore, or they don't want me there? So again, it's very personal for each of them. And just trying to unravel it in a fashion that makes sense to them, I think is very important. And we've talked about what happens to catch-up studies, what happens to enable them to get back on track against the rest of the world who have all done the same study process. So they're quite astute as to what's going on around them, and they're quite intelligent about what they've been doing, but then they'll run around house like they're 5-year-olds because they've got to get all that anxiety out as well. So I try and let them do whatever they need, but also have sort of, when a concern seems to come out, we talk about it very openly, and I think that's helped an awful lot.
Brilliant, thank you, that's very helpful. We have a question that's come in, and I might pose this to Laura, if you don't mind. Is there a danger of children who seem to be happily retreating into their safe bubble? Is there a danger of them withdrawing, even to some extent dissociating, making it much harder for them to reintegrate into normal life, school or elsewhere?
I don't think being in sort of within the lockdown scenario would lead to dissociation in the majority of young people. I think children who already present with dissociation are perhaps likely to regress back into that when they go back to school. It's unfortunately, they are going to go back. They're most likely to be overwhelmed. So if dissociation is already a coping mechanism that's in place for those young people, we're likely to see some regression in that area by the transition back into school. All the complexities that come with that, peer relationships, transition, change, a new version of school, all the things we've already been talking about today. So yeah, there is a risk of that heading back, but I wouldn't say, in terms of the withdrawal from being in the bubble, I wouldn't say that would cause dissociation.
Okay. Just a question then about the skills that children have learned. Do you think the new skills our children have learned, will it help them in some way to readjust? And I might put that one to you, Tony, because you've often spoken in the past about the importance of learning resilience. Do you think there's perhaps a chance that some good will come of this, that kids have been through this and gotten through it and have come out of the other side a bit stronger?
I like to think so. You know, I guess, you know, I'd really like to think that they have learned some things. My worry is that, or I guess I'm just curious that this is such a unique experience for children. Lockdown being a completely unique experience is going to take a lot of support to transfer those skills into other environments, because other environments just aren't going to be the same. But one hopes that for some children, it will have been their first experience of safety, that actually, you know, all of these other environments where they've been in a constant state of high alert and mistrust and not knowing, being able to predict relationships around them, if nothing else other than recognizing what is a safe relationship and what does it look like, one hopes that they can learn, help transition that into spotting safe relationships and perhaps accessing support in a broader environment.
Laura, is there anything you would add to that as well?
I think Tony summed that up really well. I think we are going to see children hopefully being able to transfer some of them skills, but it is going to take a lot of support. I think the developmental side of things, visually I see this as sort of a brick wall with a lot of bricks missing for children who've experienced trauma, and I think the time in lockdown will have definitely filled in some of those gaps. I think some of those are going to be unstable, still going to be a little bit crumbly, and then some of them might regress and might fall out again when we take them back into school. But I think some of those skills will hold with the right support in place to be able to keep building on that.
Okay. We have one more question for you. I might put this one to you, Tony. I have a 17-year-old young lady who self-harms. Lockdown has meant that we've had more incidents. I'm worried transitioning back to college is going to mean more self-harming episodes. How best can I support her?
How long have we got? I mean, I guess depending on just how those self-harming behaviours are serving in her life, you know, is it about managing anxiety? Is it about, you know, just really what's going on? But certainly the conversations about it, and really understanding that there are different things that we can do to help people who might be harming. If she's harming because she's anxious, then we can find different ways to relieve anxiety, and perhaps support her to explore some of those for herself. But if she's self-harming for a different reason, I guess that all starts with a relationship, that we start and try and provide containment through the relationship, and explore it through that, really, without going into some really big spiel about self-injurious or self-harming behaviours.
Okay, thank you. I hope that's helpful. We had a question. This is sort of a bit of a broader question about schools in general, I believe. Is this an opportunity for reform? Should we even be expecting all children to return to a system that we knew doesn't work for all before all this happened anyway? And is there a way to use this experience to forge a different path in education? Tony, I'm going to have to throw that one back to you again, I think.
I'd love to. I just think it's a bit like the green reform, that there's an opportunity for reform around pollution, and the green reform on the back of this. I would love to think that we take this as an opportunity for reform. For me, I was recently talking to some head teachers who want to put in a play curriculum as part of the transition back into school, which would be fabulous if it's possible to relieve the pressures of curriculum and Ofsted and everything else for a period of time, and examinations and, you know, testing right the way through primary. If we can just take off those pressures and allow education professionals to be the best that they are, and we know what incredible people they are and professionals they are, that so often they're confined by the strictures of education. Yes, please, you know, reform it all, definitely, now.
Everything, all of it right now. Very good. I might hand over to you if you don't mind, Hayley. Do you have anything else that you would add to that?
Yeah, I think we've had a fabulous opportunity to learn throughout this period, and I wonder if for many families there's been some real clarity around what the triggers for behaviours are for their children. And when we're busy in our rat race of just coping and surviving day in, day out, we've had an opportunity to stop and reflect and spend time together as families, and to recognise that when you remove education and transition and lots of other people from our children's lives, that reduces anxiety for many of them. I think it's crucial that we learn and we use our learning from this experience and take it forward with us. And I'm really curious to see the impact of returning to school and the emotional kind of fallout from that for families as they have to get back to normal. And I think the last thing that I've thought about is the recognition that for so many families who really, really struggle with school holidays, lockdown has been a really different experience from that. And, you know, maybe that's been about the fact that parents might have been furloughed and working from home, and they've had opportunity to provide that real consistency and continuity and really clear boundaries for children, that have enabled them to feel safe and cope really well together as a family. So we've got to learn from this stuff, absolutely.
I was actually thinking perhaps might ask you, Kerry, if you don't mind. Do you have any thoughts about how this would best be run? And do you think there might be some scope for adopted and fostered children to have a different path to other children, or would that be counterproductive?
That's a hard one, because I think foster children and adopted children need, in general, extra support. But at the same time, you don't want segregation. They have to learn how to cope in the real world as well. But if you treat all children in the same way you treat foster and adopted children, then, Susan, Tony's phrase, everyone will benefit from that. So I think if we can change how people think about things, if we can say, rather than thinking of doing this for a minority, use this for everyone, then I think every child can benefit from that approach.
Does anybody else have any other thoughts about that? I mean, perhaps Michelle, do you have any views?
I think the problem is in our family is I therapeutic parent and school don't. So we have there's a big crossover really. I think that's where sometimes my little girl struggles because she dissociates as well. So at school, I take her there and she turns into a character straight away because she's scared and she's anxious. So, and our therapeutic, all their characters, all children, my grandchildren, exactly the same way. And I think therapeutic parenting really, really works. So it's a struggle in school because I go in there saying, well, this is what I do and this is what I do. And they say, well, we're not doing that, we're doing this. And I think the crossover is, whereas in the ideal world, it'd be great if we all therapeutic parented, and then I think a lot of the problems would disappear. I think it's a standard parenting, therapeutic parenting. There's just such a massive gap there. And in our area, we are really lucky enough to have schools that therapeutic parenting. They all sort of like you said, Kerry, they treat every child the same in our school. I mean, they say about my little girl, they compare her all the time to an autistic child, and that's how they parent her at school, as an autistic child. But she's not autistic; she dissociates. So, I mean, they have one character for 1 minute, 5 minutes, and then another child for another. And the way I parent, and the same but different, if that makes sense. Whereas school just parent are exactly the same, and it's just not working for us. I don't know.
No, it's a very, very interesting point. I think it's come back to that point about consistency. How do you help children have the same experience all the time? And perhaps that's one upshot of being locked in the house with a small number of people, is it's easier to reinforce that that consistency. We've had another question come in, and which I'll read out. My partner and I have adopted 2 boys and my son in year 8 who has not been contacted once by his school, indicative of the care that he's received in the last 2 years. Subsequently, we are moving him and have had confirmation of his place. So we're really happy, but we find ourselves in the middle of lockdown, in between schools, needing to help him say goodbye to his old school and manage this enormous change to the new school. Any advice? Perhaps I might ask Hayley to have a comment on that one, if you wouldn't mind. And then Michelle, perhaps if there's anything from your therapeutic parenting point of view.
It's difficult to give a straightforward answer in the sense that children need different things, but I wonder whether there could be some kind of contact with the old school to, I don't know, maybe they could send a card or have some kind of contact. Maybe there could be opportunity for the child to go back and say goodbye at a time that they were able to. Maybe, you know, the child could write down thoughts, send a card, just kind of any contact. Maybe they could, you know, do an online thing or just something that enables the child to have some sense of closure, being able to say goodbye if that's important to them. It's really difficult, and I think lots of children are in the same position. There are children who are unable to complete their preschool experience before starting school, and I think that all of that preparatory work is missing. And I guess the government are targeting those obvious year groups, but there are always going to be children that don't fit within those targeted year groups that this is going to be really difficult for. So I think definitely I would be talking to the child and trying to find out, you know, what would meet their needs, how they could find some sense of closure in a way that satisfied that need, and then trying to enable that to happen.
Michelle, any thoughts from you?
I mean, I really think it depends on the child. My little girl wouldn't actually care. She didn't build connections really with anyone. You could take her and put her anywhere and she would be okay. My little boy, I think it would be nice to maybe have a card or a video call. I mean, we have been doing video calls with his friends, but to be fair, he's 5, so I mean, I can't comment on bigger ones because I've never really had bigger ones. And the children, my last little boy that I had, he dissociated as well, and he wasn't that bothered really about leaving people behind. So I can only comment on the children I've got.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we are almost out of time. We've actually gone over a bit longer than we thought, but I think it's been such a good discussion, and thank you everyone for your questions. Unfortunately, there's a few here that are related to schools, but I understand in the not too distant future, we're hoping to run another one of these calls with more of a focus on education specifically. It's sort of, I guess, broadly more about education rather than just adoption and fostering. So we'll wrap up in just a moment. I just wanted to say thank you so much for all the panelists on the call for talking very openly and very honestly about your experiences. Any of the questions that we've got on here, we'll try and answer via email. So I'll make sure we make a point of getting those out to people. But before we go, I just wondered if I might just turn to people and just see if you can give me a very quick thought, perhaps your experience of 2020 in a single word or so, and anything else you'd like to add. So Vicky, maybe we'll start with you.
Vacant.
John, anything from you?
I think a return to school in a vocational kind of way, less academic, more hands-on.
Great. Michelle?
I have really enjoyed 2020. I mean, it's been different, but I have enjoyed the time that I've spent with my foster children, because we don't get this, do we? It's been a joy really to get to know them better. Even though they live with me, they've lived with me for 2 years. I've learnt more about my children in 7 weeks than I have in 2 years, I think, and it's been great.
Wow, wonderful. Laura?
I think resilience pretty much sums it up. I think everyone, I take my hat off to everyone who's looking after children, families all over the country, just the resilience that everybody's showing under these really, really challenging times, managing not only the children's anxieties, but also their own anxieties, because we've all got them.
Hayley?
For me, I think it's been the opportunity to press an absolute reset button and to learn and reflect and almost stop the bus, get off the bus, and think about what's really important and what we need to learn about what helps us to be healthier and happier humans.
Great, thank you. Kerry?
I completely agree with Michelle. I love lockdown. I'm happy if it doesn't end, to be honest. And it's been great to get to know my son better, and also for my son to get to know me better. So now we enjoy our time together a lot more. So I'm hoping when we do come out of lockdown, that just continues.
Great, thank you. And finally, Tony, anything else from you to add?
No, just what a pleasure to be here with you guys, or to virtually be here with you folks. And we are going to be talking, we've got another one of these to talk specifically about schools, with some education professionals and some clinical professionals coming together. I think the therapeutic skills, whether that's about therapeutic parenting, whether it's about therapeutic skills in different places, and just the kind of forerunner to schools is, we're not asking schools to do more. We're asking them to do things differently. I think it's really important that schools, especially from government, get lots and lots of you do more, do more, do more. But when we're thinking about these kids who do need additional support, who do need to be really engaged with in slightly different ways, this isn't about asking schools to do more. It's about asking them to do things differently, to hopefully to everybody's benefit. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you. We are right out of time. So everybody, let me just finish up by saying thank you so much. I found this conversation really incredibly interesting. And thank you to everybody who's listening on the call today. If you'd like to find out more about the TAG team, just email hello@tagtrauma.com, or otherwise visit the Headsite website. And if you have any further questions or anything else you'd like to know, it's been really interesting, and we'd love to hear from you as well. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of lockdown, whatever that means. All the best for the future. Thank you.
Thank you.